Non-sectarian medicine undermines the sex. As scientific medicine gained increasingly wide acceptance, it undermined the other medical sects. Scientific medicine thereby forged unity within the profession by enabling the AMA to subordinate the sects to its own standards of medical education and practice. Overwhelmed by the increased claims of technical effectiveness for scientific medicine, the major sects began incorporating scientific medicine into their own doctrines and practice. Homeopathy, the most formidable competitor of the regular professions in the 19th century, gradually dropped its unique features. Most homeopathic physicians in America broke with pure homeopathic theory in the mid-19th century, taking what they believed valid from regular medicine and discarding especially heroic therapies. They purged the purists from their ranks by founding homeopathic medical colleges previously believed unnecessary and requiring training in general medical skills, including surgery. Most mid-century American homeopaths were regular physicians unhappy with the ineffectiveness of regular medicine and with its growing unpopularity. In 1849, 1,000 Ohio physicians and lay people, disaffected by the orthodox profession's inability to relieve suffering during the cholera epidemic, organized a homeopathic society in Cincinnati. The direct competition that homeopathy posed to regular physicians led to campaigns to exclude them from medical societies and hospital privileges. The Massachusetts Medical Society began excluding homeopaths in 1860. By the 1870s, there was a general attack led by the AMA on homeopathy and other exclusive systems of medicine. Physicians violated the AMA code of ethics if they consulted with sectarian physicians or female or black doctors. In the 1870s, the restrictions against female physicians were rescinded under pressure from the growing women's rights movement. And the exclusion of blacks was relaxed, though local medical societies and hospitals openly continued their racist practices. But the attacks on irregular doctors continued throughout the century. By the end of the 19th century, nearly all homeopaths were used by regular and homeopathic drugs. Were using both regular and homeopathic drugs. Leading homeopaths announced that the general majority of homeopathic doctors did not believe in the infinitesimal doses, rejected the universality of the law of like cures like, and generally used drugs like regular physicians. Homeopaths also became interested in clinical specialties. In 1899, the American Institute of Homeopathy redefined the homeopathic physician as one who adds to his knowledge of medicine a special knowledge of homeopathic therapeutics. Homeopathy, as well as other sects, were being overcome by competition from scientific medicine. Nonetheless, the continued popularity of homeopathy and eclectic medicine and the incomplete acceptance of scientific medicine made it difficult for regular professional leaders to win exclusive licensing privileges in the states. With the convergence in practice and education of homeopaths, eclectics, and regular physicians, it was possible to assure the dominance of scientific training and politically necessary to ignore, for the moment, these sectarian separations. Only through the combined efforts of regular and irregular profession could laws be secured to restrict medical practice to scientifically trained physicians. The profession's leaders around the country agreed with William Osier, the most eminent American physician of his day, who advised the Maryland State Medical Society in 1891, "If we wished legislation for the protection of the public, we have to ask for it together, not singly." And together they asked. Beginning in the 1870s, state legislatures established medical licensing examination boards. In 1873, Texas passed the first modern Medical Practice Act, a morale-boosting victory for the profession that offset the bitter memories of the Jacksonian era's repeal of licensure. The Illinois Board of Health, the state's licensing agency, was a model for the nation. Beginning in 1880, it began to list American and Canadian medical schools according to qualitative criteria set by the Association of Medical American Colleges, an organization of elite scientifically oriented institutions. Non-regular doctors participated in some way in medical licensing in at least 33 of the 45 states that had enacted licensing laws by 1900. Physicians from at least two sects served as the same licensing boards in 20 states. By cooperating in licensure, the non-regular physicians won inclusion among the respectable. With scientific medicine gaining ground every year, it appeared to the leaders of homeopathy that they had nothing to lose and everything to gain from their association with the regular profession. The president of the AMA even acknowledged in 1901 that with broadened and increasingly uniform curricula, it made little sense to argue that competing sects did not share the profession's competence. The reform leaders in the regular profession won the biggest rewards. By cooperating with the non-regular sects, they won licensing laws that recognized scientifically oriented reforms as the only valid basis of medical education. In short time, they secured complete control of licensing and the resources for medical education reform. Whether these elite professionals foresaw their ultimate gain from cooperating with the homeopaths and eclectics, or they were guided by expedience undiluted by strategy, the cooperative licensing efforts hastened the elimination of sectarianism amid the growing chorus of support for scientific medicine. By 1903, the AMA adopted the strategy explicitly. At its annual convention of delegates, voted to eliminate the decades-old exclusion of physicians who were trained in as homeopaths or eclectics, but chose not to designate themselves as such. 2 years earlier, AMA President Charles Reed had drawn attention to the good effects of allowing all licensed physicians into the state medical societies. By ending its exclusionary policy, he said, the New York Society had reduced the registration of sectarian physicians by nearly 90%. Scientific medicine was perhaps more effective than homeopathy and eclecticism in treating some diseases for which it had developed cures, but it was not, particularly at the turn of the century, the panacea it was believed to be. The reformers' overly optimistic assessment is shared by many contemporary medical historians. William Rothstein, for example, maintains that sex could survive in medicine only so long as medically valid therapies constituted a small part of the therapies used by physicians. Once medically valid therapies became the dominant part of medical practice, medical sectarianism declined markedly. In reality, the number of medically effective therapies had not increased significantly in the first few years of this century, the period when sectarianism declined in medicine. Rather, the campaign to win acceptance for scientific medicine struck a responsive cultural chord among the new technical managerial groups associated with industrial capitalism and with the media they controlled. The campaign established a popular belief in the broad effectiveness of scientific medicine and, together with political action by elite medical reformers, undermined the medical sects that competed with regular profession. Specialization, less competition for the elite. Advances in medical science during the late 19th century rapidly developed the technical basis for some physicians to offer highly specialized expertise not available from the ordinary practitioner. Medical advances were presumably usable by any physician, but in reality, only those who studied a particular area developed the expertise to apply techniques and inventions. The ophthalmoscope, invented by Helmholtz in 1851, required considerable study and practice to know what to look for on the other side of the cornea. Anesthetics, antisepsis, and asepsis made surgery a relatively safer procedure, but the masters of surgical techniques were those who devoted the entire practice to it. The very existence of medical specialization rested upon the reductionist analysis of the body and disease. Its concrete development was made possible by advances in medical science. Nevertheless, specialization among practitioners was encouraged by economic competition within the profession and grew to take advantage of the new market for more technical, seemingly more scientifically medical services. With dissatisfaction rampant among more ambitious members of the profession, some 15,000 American physicians studied medicine in Germany alone. They returned to reap the benefits of their advanced training and confidence to specialize in some branch of clinical medicine. Successful specialists, more than twice as much as the better-off general practitioners, earned more than twice as much. Elite, scientifically oriented physicians saw specialization as a solution for themselves in the competitive medical market. The demand for specialists grew with the urban middle class. Patients who owned social positions was based on the growth of technology and industrialization sought out physicians whose practice suggested the same worldview. Gynecological theory viewed most female disease as being rooted in or associated with uterine problems. As Barbara Ehrenreich and Deidre English have amply demonstrated, Victorian femininity itself was associated with invalid and physical and emotional frailty, invalidism and physical and emotional frailty. Women of better classes were defined as sick in order to support their role as social ornamentation, demonstrating the financial and social success of their husbands and distinguishing them from the lower class women who were expected to work and were considered sickening. Gynecological surgeons preyed upon the supposedly delicate nature of upper middle class women and the terrible consequences of having tipped uterus or sexual appetite. Hysterectomies, ovariotomies, and clitoridectomies were prescribed for these and other female maladies. Some gynecologists, like Horatio Bigelow, writing in the AMA Journal in 1885, favored a conservative approach over too rash use of the knife or mechanical devices. He believed that better results could be attained by attention to every detail of life, even the most insignificant, for the aggregation of little things go to making of the big ones, and also by attention to physical conditions and reactions. Such attention, of course, required daily visits from the doctor. Gynecologists tailored their medical theories to the prevailing notions of the place of women in society and thereby developed a new and lucrative medical market. Upper-class women became the objects of knife-wielding gynecological surgeons or the invalided captives of overly attentive gynecological practitioners. From the early 1890s, abdominal and pelvic surgeries seemed the profession's own gold rush, and surgeons were, in the words of AMA Journal, as restless and ambitious a throng as ever fought for fame upon the battlefield. General practitioners obviously suffered to the extent that their patients went to specialists with complaints of GPs formerly treated. From the 1850s onwards, the GP-dominated medical societies attacked what they viewed as unfair competition. In 1874, the AMA's Judicial Council ruled that specialists could advertise only that their practices were limited to diseases peculiar to women or diseases of the eye and ear. Such restrictions on specialists denied the claims of scientific leaders that specialism was based on greater expertise not available to general practitioners. Moreover, few physicians at the time could completely limit their practices to specialties since specialization was not yet widely enough accepted. Conditions soon changed, at least in large and medium-sized cities. Specialists promoted the medical sciences through their own societies. Following a rebuff by the AMA, which named a committee of medically conservative professionals instead of distinguished medical scientists to host the 1887 International Medical Congress, specialists and other medical scientists formed the Association of American Physicians. In 1888, all national specialty societies formed an alliance outside the AMA and the American Congress of Physicians and Surgeons. In the last years of the 19th century, as scientific medicine increased and economic base of specialism grew more secure, membership in scientific societies increased, particularly in eastern cities where medical centers were beginning to dominate medicine while membership in AMA languished. Medical specialties societies were intended not only to promote development of the specialty, but also to gain acceptance of the specialist by general practitioners. Even though they were competitors, specialists relied heavily on referrals from other physicians for much of their practice. Generalists had to be induced to refer their difficult cases to other physicians. To encourage referrals, many, if not most specialists, gave a portion of their fee to the doctor who made the referral. Fee splitting became a widespread practice to control competition and gain acceptance of specialists by GPs. Fee splitting, however, was a private tool of individuals used to soften competitive relations among themselves. For fee splitting to be used collectively by the organized profession would require an open admission of the existence and legitimacy within the profession. That would have been worse than the competition that fee splitting was attempting to regulate, because it was a purely commercial agreement that undercut professional claims of expertise and privilege. It thereby reduced public confidence in physicians and further weakened the social and political position of the profession. Fee splitting could not resolve conflicting interests between specialists and GPs at the national level. Ultimately, the development of specialties and subspecialties had indeed reduced overall competition within the medical profession. The ratio of primary care physicians had fallen from more than 170 per 100,000 population in 1900 to less than 60 per 100,000 today. But the division of physician labor into specialties created interprofessional problems, pitting general practitioner against specialists. The decline in primary care physicians had eased the problem somewhat, but it was still a serious split in the ranks at the turn of the century and an obstacle to efforts of the scientifically oriented elite practitioners and medical faculty who led the reform movement. New levels of accreditation and specialists emerged in the 20th century. The American College of Surgeons was charged with being elitist and un-American for its efforts to restrict surgery to specially licensed physicians and to accredited hospitals. In 1912, Franklin Martin's public relations tour for the College of Surgeons was interrupted with heckling by hostile GPs. The college fellows were accused either of degrading the profession by forming a glorified surgical union along labor lines, or of establishing a new oligarchy, an exclusive 400 in the profession. The reform leadership gathering in the wings of the AMA included many leading specialists, but they saw the importance of putting the interests of the profession as a whole at the forefront of their campaign. After failing in 1898, they succeeded in 1901 and 1902 in their efforts to reorganize the AMA into a more effective national organization. Their strategy included the delicate issue of unifying the competing specialists and general practitioners and bringing these specialists into the profession's main political arm, the AMA. Gains and losses. Scientific medicine was clearly an effective doctrine for the reform and uplift of the medical profession. It increased the technical effectiveness of doctors, providing a basis for increasing public confidence in the profession. The need for research and the teaching of medical sciences created a whole new category of academic medicine. It united the interests of these academic physicians who sought total victory for scientific medical schools over less adequate ones, with the interest of elite practitioners who wanted to reduce production and competition among doctors in order to raise their incomes and status. The requirements of scientific medical education strained the resources of commercial medical education to the breaking point, closing down many medical schools and reducing the production of physicians. It also provided the rationale for requiring extensive preliminary education of medical school applicants, forcing the poorer classes out of the medicine and thereby raising the social class base of the profession. Furthermore, scientific medicine undermined sectarian medicine, uniting most of the divided profession under the banner of non-sectarian scientific medicine. Finally, it provided a basis for further decreasing competition within the profession through the development of specialization. Thus, scientific medicine helped complete the professionalization of medicine. These gains to the medical profession were accompanied by some losses. Some of the losses were borne by less powerful members of the profession. The gains of specialists, the new elite among practitioners, were the losses of the general practitioners. Scientific medicine provided the profession's scientific elite with the means of securing its position and taking complete control. While society benefited from more effective techniques against infectious diseases, people lost the benefits of traditional techniques and became dependent on technological medicine. The propaganda of the reform-minded elite sold scientific medicine as the last word on matters of health and disease. Through their campaign, the medical profession excluded herbal methods of prevention and therapy that are only now regaining popularity. They also narrowed the scope of medical inquiry to reductionist concepts, all but ignoring the social and economic context of health and disease. The doctor was portrayed as omniscient and his skill as all-powerful. Patients, accepting the profession's claims and wanting something for their money, began to expect their doctors to provide remedies for their suffering. Not wanting to discharge this profitable attitude, most physicians believe that, in the words of the late 19th century physician, he fails of his duty and his privilege who neglects to do something for the patient. However, even this lucrative attribution of physician omniscience was a double-edged sword. Armed with assurances of near infallibility of medical science, patients demanded compensation when they were maimed by the therapies or mistakes of scientific doctors. The number of malpractice suits from 1900 to 1915 exceeded the number of suits during the entire 19th century. Naturally, the most oppressed groups in society suffered the most from the complete professionalization of medicine made possible by scientific medicine. The poorer classes in general, and ethnic and racial minorities in particular, have suffered doubly, by being excluded from entering the profession and by losing medical care that was indigenous to their communities and accessible to them. By the early 1900s, people who could afford specialists increasingly relied on them, often bypassing general practitioner altogether. The poor filled the waiting rooms and examining tables of teaching hospitals to become the teaching and research material for interns, residents, and specialists. The nation's wage earners, excluded from charity clinics by means tests and often unable to afford private specialist fees, became the bread and butter clients of the non-elite general practitioners. Following the later successful doctors' campaigns to rid the country of midwives, working class and rural women and men lost the services that helped maintain the integrity of their famines during the disruption of childbirth and found themselves having to pay the higher fees of physicians and the cost of the hospital bed. Women suffered from unnecessary surgery and suffocating attention from the gynecologist. They, like the working class and racial minorities in general, were also excluded from becoming doctors. The fewer physicians competing for consumers' dollars, the higher physicians' incomes rose, and the fewer doctors who practice in working class and poor sections of the cities and in the countryside. The middle class became the main source of income for a majority of the profession. As Morris Fishbein, editor of the AMA Journal, complacently observed in 1927, the physician of the future will deal largely with this group. From them, most of the physicians who are themselves of the middle class will derive their incomes. The dynamics that lifted the white middle class and upper class male physicians to the top of their hierarchy were not based on conspiracies or conscious deceptions. Physicians acted in their collective self-interest. While the different interest groups within the profession often clashed, their conflicts were gradually overwhelmed by growing belief that all who embraced scientific medicine would benefit. Old-time homeopaths and eclectics, of course, fell by the wayside, and proprietors of crassly commercial medical schools lost their lucrative businesses. But most physicians could relate to the purposes of the reform campaign: more respect for their skills, higher social status, more money, and to the necessary means of achieving them. Undoubtedly, conspiracies and conscious deceptions occurred along the way. We will see some examples in Chapter 4. But even the reform leaders believed their mission would benefit society as well as the medical profession. Nevertheless, it strains the imagination to conclude that the complete professionalization of medicine served the interests of more than a small minority of the population. The technical limitations of 19th century medicine were replaced by technical narrowness in the 20th century. The professional pluralism by professional monopoly controlled by elite specialists and medical academicians, the culturally diverse and widely distributed group of healers by a more fully stratified and, for many, inaccessible professional class. These were some of society's losses that accompanied the profession's gains. The consolidation of a scientific medical profession, however, also provided important gains for the corporate class in America. End chapter 2.